I'm here with Janice Van Cleve, an activist here in Seattle, mostly centered around the 1990s. Janice, why don't you start by telling me a bit about your upbringing?
Okay. Well, originally from Colorado, got my bachelor's degree at the University of Colorado, and then came out here to Seattle because they had a good medieval department and a good language department, and those were my two majors. Graduated in '73 with a master's in medieval history. Big paycheck out of that. So I had to go find a real job, and I went in the Army for 3 years. My family, all of us dating way back to wherever, are Germans, and going in the Army is what you do. My daughter went in the Army, my son went in the Army too. We're all veterans. After that, I was in military intelligence, and so at that time, this was late 60s, early 70s, we were using computers that were as big as a house. But that was my introduction to computers. And so when I came out of the Army, I went into the computer field and ended up 25 years later being able to retire comfortably, and then looked around for what I was going to do next. But during that time is when that I came out, 1983, and got involved in politics and activism, and between the 80s and the 90s was the main period when I was active in various organizations. Queer Nation, Seattle Metropolitan Election Committee, the Commission for Lesbians and Gays, Dignity, the Catholic Gay and Lesbian Organization, and several others that I probably remember in the course of our conversation, but I don't right now. Anyway, in the year 2002, well, in 2000, I started moving into world travel, writing, and archaeology. And I was elected to the president of the Seattle Wine Society, because I've been a wine taster for 50 years. And I'm called upon to do wine tastings and wine selections for people for special dinners. But then I was on the board of directors for Seattle Baroque Orchestra and then Early Music Guild, and I just got finished with that one. And so right at the moment, although this should not be let out, I am boardless. And that's a good feeling. In the course of these years also, I was president and treasurer of my condominiums. So, yeah, I've been on a lot of committees. The first major political activity that I got into, well, let's back up a little bit before that. Like everybody else, I complained about things. I complained about the way the city was run, the state was run, the way things were going, and of course, this was before I actually, or during the process that I was uncomfortable with myself and the suburban lifestyle and so forth. I discovered an important thing, and that is, if you don't have the right to complain unless you get in and do something about it. And the best way is to get on a campaign, to volunteer for a candidate's election, and to volunteer for phone banking and doorbelling for issues too. Nobody loves you more than when you're volunteering for something else. When you volunteer for a candidate and they win, when you write a letter, they answer. When you meet them at town meetings, they always call on you. It becomes a relationship, and all politics is really about relationships. So being involved with campaigns was my first taste, and it was really a lot of fun. You do wild and crazy things. I mean, you know, I remember one time I was working on, I worked on Sherry Harris's campaign with Bill Dubay and a number of other people, and Tom, I'll remember his name too, starts with a P. But we finished on Sherry Harris's campaign, and she had a friend who had helped her financially and otherwise down in San Mateo, California. And so she called a meeting of a bunch of us lesbians over on Queen Anne Hill. We were all in our little white blouses and little blue skirts. And she said a very important truth, and that is politics is something we all need to invest in, just like we invest in our homes and in our food and savings and stuff like that. Everybody should budget politics as part of their normal budgeting activity. And so she said, I need 8 volunteers to go to California next week and work on a campaign down there. Of course, why not? And so that Friday, a van pulled up at my condo. We all jumped in. I didn't know anybody. And we drove all night. Next day, we worked for a good solid week, maybe 8 or 9 days on that campaign. Kathy Allen was one of the people we worked with. And by the way, if you're checking on activism in Seattle, Kathy Allen is another one to check in on. She's a great supporter of women in politics. So doing the official political action is a lot of fun, and you do get results. The unofficial part is also a lot of fun, and this is when I got involved with Queer Nation. We did actions. It was a sort of thing where there was an ongoing presence of Queer Nation. We're talking about the 80s, early 90s, here in Seattle. And one of the actions was a cop arrested somebody, 2 guys, on 11th and Pike, of all places, kissing in public. And the cops didn't like that. And so they interfered, and then a lesbian stood up and got in their face, and so they arrested her and took her to the East Precinct. She broke their cribbage board. And so that was a perfect action for Queer Nation. The next week, we all showed up at East Precinct, and we did a kiss-in, sitting on the police desks, filling the lobby. And it was not only made a good statement for the LGBT community. I got 3 dates out of it. Same thing happened at the World Trade Organization, WTO protests. Met a very nice cop, and we were friends for quite a long time. I mentioned to you the Queer Nation action that we did down in Oregon. There was a movement in Oregon led by a person named Lon Mabon, whom you probably heard from other people, to ban gays and lesbians from schools, and the whole homophobia thing was going on down there. And one of these was Measure 2. Well, I volunteered and drove down there and worked several weekends at their headquarters down there, just as an individual. And yes, when we were locking up the office late at night, there were, the hoods parked out in their cars out in front to try to intimidate us. But we did beat that measure. One of the actions we did take, and I'm not okay, I'm not really clear on this, whether this action was connected with measure 2 or the next measure. But Coronation met right here in this neighborhood. And we went down and did a funeral procession from something universe, perfect universe shopping center. We draped our cars in black. We were all in leathers. And we drove slowly to Lon Mabon's headquarters. And we got out and we did a perfect formation in front. We had 4 television crews working it, and we laid a black wreath at the door. That was a great action. We had a lot of fun doing that. Let's see. Seattle Metropolitan Elections Committee. This committee, I don't know if you're familiar with it. Yeah. Anyway, that was also a lot of work, but we really got to work the candidates and then publish the results. It almost became a ritual. There was a certain activity we did in January. It was kind of a fundraiser and meet the candidates who were already coming out. And then we do the interviews during the summer and then publish the results. And later I became co-chair with Herb Crone. And we devised the grading system and the interview system so that, to build the credibility, so that our questions and our results were graded fairly for every candidate. It was a result of the Sherry Harris campaign in 1991 that, and this is where I met Bill DeBay. He was the Yardside King. And when she got elected, she nominated me for the Commission for Lesbians and Gays. And I worked on that from 92 to, I think, 97. Jerry DeGreek was one of the co-chairs I worked with. And but we had several co-chairs during that whole event. The 2 efforts that I worked on there was, one, domestic partnership. And we passed the domestic partnership ordinance in the city. I remember Norm Rice we met in his office, the bunch of us, and he said, well, find out what the other cities are doing. What's the status of this? Maybe we can get back together in a couple months. And I said, I'll have it on your desk in 2 weeks. And he said, oh yeah? Well, I was working for Microsoft at that time. And at Microsoft, we didn't take any prisoners. We didn't waste any time. If it was going to be a 48-hour effort, it's going to be a 48-hour effort. And this is when I'm still trying to remember his name, executive director at Lambert House, we got together on the phones and we called, is that the one? Was that the one we did? No, that was a different effort. That was a different effort. I'll get back to that. We got the results from all the other cities who already had domestic partner benefits, registration, and yep, it was passed here in Seattle. And Cal Anderson and his partner, I think, stood in line. They were the first ones to register. Cal was a good friend. We miss him. I remember testifying in Olympia a couple of times with him. When the anti-gay measures came up here to Washington State, of course, Hands Off Washington was working on that. There's another name that I should have written down a list of names for you because there's so many of them right now. But Hands Off Washington was working those, and as these measures came up here, and Lon Mabin came up here too, and they were trying to push the anti-gay measures in Seattle. On the, let me organize this a little bit. On the Queer Nation side, this was beginning of '93. I think it was February 6th of '93. Come to think of it. Yeah, when KCTS was putting on a Lon Mabin show with several of the conservatives from Jack Kemp. He was one of the anti-gay people who was meeting there, and they were putting on a show. So Queer Nation decided to put a protest. In 1 week, we organized 600 people to surround KCTS, and I liaisoned with the police. So we had, okay, we're going to stand here. You guys are just going to stand there. Police going to ride around on their horses. Everybody's going to be cool. And it was wonderful, wonderful protest in brilliant sunshine. It was really good. Where was I going with the other one though? Hands Off Washington. Anyway, we did have one conflict with Hands Off Washington at one point, and this is where we get to the marriage issue. So this would be the beginning of '95, I'm going to say. That would be the right time. Anyway, Hands Off Washington wanted to put an initiative on the ballot. And there were many, many, many. Kurt Pavela, he's one you've got to talk to. He's in Tacoma. No, he's in Olympia. He was on the Olympia City Council, but he was part of the effort up here at that time. He's a good friend of Bill DeBay's. Anyway, Kurt Pavela and the others, we met at my place, and we said, no, we cannot have a public vote on persons' civil rights. That is not something that majority votes on. That is something that's intrinsic to our rights under the Constitution. And so we had a big meeting at 13th at East Precinct, Hands Off Washington, Seattle activists, and we said, no, don't do it. Do not go there. And at the moment, it was kind of a division in the community, but the Seattle LGBT community is anything if not active, contentious sometimes. Anyway, Pride Foundation. See, when you get to be 70, you'll forget a lot of names too. Oh gosh. Anyway, he was the executive director of Pride Foundation, and I picture him in my mind, just can't attach the name yet. Called together a meeting called COCO, Citizens, or Coalition for Community Action. Coalition for Community Action over here on 19th and Pine, this building right here. It's wonderful. I mean, it's kind of like a ghost walk in this neighborhood. You walk past the building and, oh yeah, I remember the meeting that happened there. Anyway, we had a big meeting. Okay, we've had this little fight. Now, what are our priorities? What things are we working on? And I knew there were 3 priorities for me. The 3 pillars of homophobia: military, marriage, and ministry. Those are the 3 M's. And if we could take those 3, homophobia as an institution would stop. You have individual haters all the time, but at least as an institution, it wasn't there. And so I formed a committee to work on marriage. And golly, her name is right on the end of my tongue. She was the president of Hands Off Washington. It starts with a J. Anyway, she and I worked together on that, and that was part of the healing of the community. At the same time, Evan Wolfson came to Seattle because in 1995 is when the Hawaii Supreme Court ruled that barring gays and lesbians from marriage was unconstitutional under the Hawaiian Constitution. Oh boy, the furor was raging throughout the United States, and Evan Wolfson came here to Seattle and met with John Wilkinson and a couple of the other people with Bailey used to own the books, Bailey Coy bookstore down here in Broadway. Anyway, and that's one of the names for Bailey Boucher came from them. Anyway, he met with them and was promoting same-sex marriage. He is, marriage equality, freedom to marry nationally. And John Wilkinson and I got together shortly thereafter, and we decided, we're working on the same thing. Let's put this together. And so it was on September 10th of 1995. We met in Dave and John's house out in Lake City. And that's where we founded the Legal Marriage Alliance of Washington. There were, I'm going to say about 12 of us, really interested in this issue. We really were convinced that that's one of the pillars, was one of the strongest pillars that we had to take in order to gain equality for the LGBT community, because we all knew as a community that coming out as individuals was a very important part of cutting through the other stuff and making us real human beings to the general public. Putting our love lives coming out was a whole nother leap, and equating our love lives with everybody else's love lives, it's all just love, was a huge leap. And we knew that that's one, if we could do it, if we could be successful, that's the one that would eventually get us our complete freedoms. So we had some PFLAG groups around the state that were asking for us to, that were interested in this issue because their kids wanted to get married too. And so I was elected president of Legal Marriage Alliance, and I went around all over the state, every Pride March, every PFLAG meeting, and spoke about same-sex marriage and what we were doing to organize that and to organize other people in the state. I can tell you that from Redmond to Selah, Washington, which is over by Yakima, is exactly 2 hours in rush hour traffic with no state patrol, because I did it. One of the best moments was speaking at an Easter Sunday Lutheran service in Longview in full leathers. That was wonderful. I went over to Clarkston, which is way over in the southeast corner of the state, and I spoke in Spokane several times, and Bellingham several times. It really made it a statewide thing, and people from the rest of the state were communicating back and forth. And Equality Washington was not Equality Washington at the time. It's Equal Rights Washington, and before that, that's the outgrowth of Hands Off Washington. Anyway, became one of their major issues too. We worked that all through the whole later part of the 1990s, when all the amendments and constitutional amendments and stuff all over the nation were blossoming all over the place. And then in 2002 is when I left that organization, left Legal Marriage Alliance. I had a major tummy operation and had to take it easy for a while. That's when Winters took over as president, and Jamie Peterson, he was our secretary. You're going to talk to Jamie too, aren't you?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. Anyway, so that was our marriage effort. From there on, Winters carried it, John Wilkinson carried it, and then when Equality Washington adopted it too, and sure enough, it passed. And passing it in this state, that was a great year, because we passed it in this state, and then we won it on the ballot as well. The referendum to overturn it, we won that, 74. That was a good one. I phone banked for weeks on that one, down at the Labor Hall down in Georgetown. And we did that one. That was, and then they had the Supreme Court, rule, and it was inevitable that they had to rule that way, but, for them to rule, that was just icing on the cake. So that was a huge victory. The victories we won in the military, I was not part of the military activity because I was out of the military for a very long time by that time. But, that's there. And now Gates, who used to be the Secretary of Defense, now head of the Boy Scouts, that's one. We've done it on a lot of fronts. We've still got housing and employment to do throughout the country. Other things, other activism. What can I say? I was fortunate that my last place of employment was Microsoft, and worked there for 3,000 of those 25 years. That's what it felt like, but it was good. I enjoyed Microsoft a lot, and it didn't hurt that that period of time in the 90s we had galloping stock options, and so I am able today to donate to a lot of campaigns, which I do. And I'm a member. I was in the 43rd district, PCO, Precinct Committee Officer. I was PCO of the year there and convener for the caucuses. I had 22 precincts, which the year Obama first ran meant I had 1,400 people to manage just Seattle Central Community College. And we did it. 4.5 hours. We did it. We collected the money. We nominated our delegates and closed up shop. It was good. Now I'm PCO in the 37th district. This is my precinct here. But now with the advent of websites and neighborhood networks, there's a whole network called Nextdoor, which is just wonderful. You can communicate with thousands, or I shouldn't say thousands, hundreds of neighborhoods. And so I post my voting recommendations out there. CMEC has had some rough years since the end of the 90s. And I felt it was too important an activity just to drop or to not go anywhere and not have the same credibility it used to have. So I picked up the slack myself, and I went, and I still do. I go to all the fundraisers, I go to all the kickoff meetings, I review every website, and I interview candidates sometimes when I have questions, and then I publish a ratings a rating sheet or recommendations. And there's a few of us now who coordinate these. We disagree sometimes. We disagree every time, but not on all races. But it's still staying active. And as far as being out is concerned, yeah. Just read the post office walls. You know, the NSA, CIA, FBI, they're all there on the phone line. They're picking up this now, right? Okay. Being out and getting beyond that. You know, they talked about the post-gay thing. Really, you know, our sex lives don't define us. It's our brains and our willingness to work. That's what we contribute to the community, and so, you know, people don't really care anymore. The public in general. It's okay. You know, what can you do? And so, you know, I just continued to do the political activity. Anything else that you picked up that?
You mentioned you played a role in Legal Opinion 10.
Oh yeah, okay. This goes back into the 80s. This is about 1985. There was an issue in the transgender community about restrooms. There's always an issue about restrooms. There was an incident, and so I took it to I wrote the mayor. I mean, you know, I worked on his campaign, so I wrote to him. This was Royer, Charles Royer at the time. And he said, well, it sounds like an issue that should be referred to the Human Rights Department, or the Civil Rights Department, whatever they called it then, which was right here on 14th and Yesler, that way. So I met with them and filed a formal complaint, and they pursued it. We won the complaint. Part of their investigation involved getting in contact with a civil rights lawyer. I think her name was Barbara Heavey. I think I remember that right. She wrote opinion number 10. This became a groundwork legal opinion for treatment of transgender people and how they can be accommodated in the public sector. The city council was at that time working on non-discrimination issues in public accommodations, housing, and employment. And Jeanette Williams was the city council person at the time. How come I can remember names from way back and I can't remember things up close? Anyway, Tom Rasmussen was her aide at the time. Well, he and I got together, and they were working on this ordinance, and I said, well, here you've got legal opinion number 10. This is some ammunition for you, some groundwork. So we worked up the definition for sexual orientation, because all that the ordinance was going to say was no discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. We defined sexual orientation to cover all the LGBT people. And that went into the Public Accommodations Ordinance, which was passed in '86. Of course, and I knew this from other things I'd done in the public sphere, that once you set the precedent in one thing, lawyers and legislators are like the rest of us. They're lazy. They borrow. So if you got it in one place, and they're going to put non-discrimination and include sexual orientation in the other non-discrimination clause, well, they're going to take the definition along with them. So they did. And that's how it got into the employment and housing, open housing ordinances in Seattle and St. Louis and Pittsburgh copied us, almost word for word. And now I think it's changed a little bit, due in large part to the work of people like Marsha Botzer. Sexual orientation and gender identity. It's been lifted out from just sexual orientation and put in as its own category, and that's being adopted around the country. So that's where the legal opinion number 10. It still bounces around down at City Hall, but that was a good win. That was a major win, because it's legislation, and when it gets embodied in a legal opinion and then into the law, it's there, baby. It isn't going anywhere. So I'm glad you asked that one. Yeah.
Can you think of anything else?
One other thing. There was my original coming out was in 1983 over at Seattle Counseling Service. I forget who was in charge at that time, but they were at 1505 Broadway. And they would have regular Friday night meetings, and that's where I met a bunch of transgendered people there. And one of them, we founded an organization called the Emerald City. And that was an organization for transvestites to get together and go to restaurants and do things. It was a social club. But one of the people who was involved, her name was Michelle, she used to go to conventions like this, in other parts of the country, and said, we should have one here. She was in her employment. She was a major magazine and salesperson, regional manager, thing like that. So marketing. She was all about that. And so we thought, okay, we can put on a convention here. I was secretary of the Emerald City at the time, and so okay, this person's got an idea. Let's put together, see what we can do with it. And we decided, number one, don't do it in Seattle, because you get a bunch of people in a convention to come to Seattle, and they won't come to your classes and meetings. They'll be out on the town. So we decided Port Angeles, a logging town, a rural town. Who's the senator from there? Jim Hargrove? Is that him? Anyway, he's one of the Democrats who might as well have an R in the back of his name. Anyway, real conservative town, I thought. But the Red Lion Inn was perfectly open to host the convention. So, this person, Michelle, kind of planned convention things. I had to think about, okay, police, city council, chamber of commerce, these practical things that you got to do. So I called them, and then I went over and visited them, and they were fine. And then somebody else in the Emerald City said, well, they would like to do tea in Victoria at the Empress Hotel. Now, you think about post 9/11, to put a bunch of transvestites on a ferry boat to go across customs lines with identifications that don't match what they look like, to be in another country and then come back into the United States, you cannot do that. But we did it that was 1990. That was 1990. That convention in Port Angeles is still going on every year in May. And Port Angeles looks forward to it. because we did some good public relations building. They have a thing in Port Angeles called that they support their children's hospital or their hospital over there. It's they sell little rubber duckies, and you put a number on them, and you pay some money for each duck. And they let them go in the Elwha River, and whichever duck comes first out the end, there's some prize or something like that. And the money goes to benefit their hospital. Well, the gals, I think we had 60, 70 people at the first convention. They bought tons of ducks. That really solidified that group in with the Port Angeles. And then the profit that we made off the convention, we gave to the Battered Women's Shelter. Another big write-up in the paper. So every year, Port Angeles looks forward to this. Pretty soon they'll have a spree day, probably, or a spree week. So, yeah, these things can happen if they're well organized, if you meet people where they are, understanding, like, we're doing an interview, and so the consideration is, okay, your lighting, your spacing, where you're going to sit, where everybody's going to sit, that sort of thing, noise levels. Well, if you're dealing with a city council, or you're dealing with a mayor or other people like that, you got to understand what issues they're trying to deal with. Police, public safety, mayor, re-election. But if you meet people where they are, and you take into consideration and accommodate, their concerns, they're more than willing to accommodate yours, and things work. This is why in Queer Nation, when we did our demonstrations, we always contacted the police first, told them where we're going to start, where we're going to go, what we're going to do, and if they had any pushback on something, okay, we'll go down this street instead of that street, and we'll do this thing instead of that thing. They're fine. Surprises is the main thing that officials don't like. If there's no surprises, they are happy. And so we try to keep them from having surprises. I worked with the police also I'm going to go back now to the Commission for Lesbians and Gays. The other main effort that I worked on there was the police. We had an issue of sex in the parks. And, neighbors complain, and then the police have to come, and then the gay community says it's harassment, and, okay. So the commission's sitting in the middle. What do we do? So my first effort was to see if this actually happened, or the neighbors just making this up. So at 11 o'clock at night, I walked into Volunteer Park. I didn't see anything. Walked into a bunch of bushes. Oh my gosh, there's all kinds of people in here. And oh my gosh, Janice Van Cleve is in here. Okay, you didn't see me, I didn't see you, everybody go home. And we split. So then I knew that, okay, stuff really is going on in the parks. And so I worked with the police to ride-arounds and various places. And we met Jim Pujol, who was in the police department at the time. I think he was assistant police chief, and I think he may have resigned when O'Toole got in. But anyway, we worked on this issue. I was one of the instructors at the police academy, from the community, just on a part-time basis, no pay. What are our concerns? What are your concerns? To work that out. But that was good. And I think my takeaway from the police department was all the same thing. They don't want surprises, and they're more than willing to accommodate if you take into account what they've got to deal with. And I was surprised when I came away from all the ride-alongs and everything. One, how many domestic violence issues they deal with every night, every precinct. And two, how much paperwork they have to do. And so, yeah, that was just another experience in the process.
You mentioned, or you alluded to activity in the WTO action.
Mm-hmm.
Could you say a little more about your role in that?
I was not an organizer. There was too much else going on at the time. But that was probably one of the, I think, seminal moments, not just for Seattle, but for the entire country, on the revolt of the people saying, we're not going to take this corporate stuff anymore. It is, I think, because of WTO that we've had these things like more calls for rent control, rise of minimum wage, parental leave that Microsoft and Netflix is offering now, and others are coming along, that we've elected a proud socialist to be on our city council, and other people, because WTO showed that people just are not going to take it anymore. And remember, WTO happened in December of 1999. That was before the recession, when Wall Street got very wealthy and everybody else lost their homes, which just solidified things. But no, I was on one of the protest lines at Pike and Boren, and one of the police on the other side was one of the lesbians who was on the police force. She was cute and she looked good in uniform. So, even with the armor. And so we became good friends.
Okay. Can you think of anything else?
Writing. I was editor for the Dignity magazine for a Dignity newspaper for a while, and I wrote, and I have written for the Seattle Gay News, and that short-lived paper, Seattle General News, or Seattle Standard, I think it was. But I wrote articles for the papers for a while. But I got the archaeology bug, and I've been totally involved in that so far, and in the pagan community. So I left the Catholic Church back there as part of the whole process of the Nazi Pope getting elected.
All right.
So.
Just one last question.
Sure.
Since 2002, how, in what ways have you remained active within the community?
Okay. Since 2002, I've been active in the mainstream Democratic Party. I'm a member of the 36th. I was a member of the 43rd. I am a current member of the 37th. I'll probably renew my membership to the 43rd. I go to the meetings. I participate in general city, state, and national politics. Mostly through supporting candidates, writing letters, and organizing people, especially when it comes time for elections. Those are my main activities politically right now.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Well, thank you.